my clairvoyant vision doesn't come from my actual eyeballs. It comes from a screen of information just here to me off the left side of my forehead. It's adorable to me when people are like, what color is my aura? Because auric fields are actually very complex. There's many, many different layers and many, many different colors.
I am here today with Sarah K. Grace, who used her innate psychic gifts as a paramedic in California's busiest 911 systems for 15 years. And she's able to see, hear, and feel energy beyond the normal senses. And she's had these abilities since about the age of 7 and has a lot of really fascinating experiences to share. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, girl. Thanks for having me.
It's nice of course.
Hi, everybody.
Really looking forward to diving into your story. So should we start at the beginning? Your clairvoyant abilities began at the age of 7, and what was that like for you?
So I grew up in the middle of South Dakota in a tiny town of 2,000, pre-internet. So literally middle of nowhere, literally disconnected. I was just a normal kid, so I thought. And one day I just woke up, and the very first indication was that I could see colors around things. So I started to see the auric field. Over the next several weeks or months, that continued to grow in terms of being able to feel other people's feelings, know people's thoughts or intentions. I could see disease in people's bodies, and then I could ultimately see spirits. And so here I am, just a kid, just doing my thing. And I didn't understand. And it was really overwhelming for me. I came from a very conservative family, a lot of religious belief and kind of devout. So when I finally said something, unfortunately, I was shamed and condemned, which I think a lot of people can relate with, right? And I really internalized that as toxic shame in that moment because I thought that there was something mentally wrong with me. And I just wanted, to be like normal, like everybody else. I didn't understand what these abilities were or why they were there until many years later.
Wow, that sounds like quite an experience for a young child to develop these gifts and then be shamed for it.
Yes, for sure. More and more now, thankfully, there's so much more conversation, open conversation like your show and all these other amazing platforms where people are able to kind of talk about, whether it's near death or expanded consciousness experience or like the psychic or intuitive world. And so fortunately, it's becoming a lot more prevalent. But back then, oh yeah, it was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
For me, for sure.
Man, I just spoke to someone else who saw a spirit as a young child and was able to locate this person's body. And then everybody assumed that he had killed this person or done something to this person because how else would he have known? And
right.
But things have changed, like you said. The collective mindset on this has changed so much.
So much. And honestly, now I understand that all of it has been for a reason, for my own experience, for my own growth, for my own integration. So now that I can help other people who are energetically sensitive or dealing with addictions or traumas or having death experience, near-death experience, and we can almost normalize it. So that's kind of more of what I'm up to now. We can talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to your experience as a child, how did you perceive the auras? Are they different colors or different like light patterns, or what do they look like?
Yes. And so it's adorable to me when people are like, what color is my aura? Because auric fields are actually very complex. And for me, I'm still, because I was a paramedic for so long, I've got a really grounded, kind of like real way of looking at things. So I'm not super esoteric. I'm kind of nitty gritty and like handle business kind of gal. And so in the auric field itself, there's many, many different layers and many, many different colors. So my clairvoyant vision doesn't come from my actual eyeballs. It comes from a screen of information just here to me off the left side of my forehead. And this is where most of my data and information comes from. But if you think of looking at a person, like I can see that you're wearing a black shirt, right? And brown hair, so I can see you, but it's almost like an overlay, like a computer overlay, and it just expands. So the first layer of the aura is just about 1/4 inch, and then about 6 inches is the next, and then a couple of feet is the next, and it goes roughly about 9 feet off, and each layer has different data, algorithms, informations, and colors.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not just like green.
Like information? Is it holding information?
It's data, it's information, because if we think about, to me, everything is just energy. And when I was listening to your, intro bio video, I was like, oh yeah, when you were describing the mandala and kind of the tapestry of consciousness, and there's all of these layers of detailed information, a lot of which the human mind cannot comprehend, right? Because there's so many different states. But pertaining to the physical body, the initial somatic and the organ systems all vibrate at a certain range, right? And so there's a certain range for health. And so if somebody's healthy and happy, they shine really bright, and they can have multiple colors. They can look like light brights, so they can have rich jewel tones. That's unfortunately much more rare to see out and about in today's culture, because we're living through such crazy times. So what I see more often is almost like an inversion of really heavy, cloaked gray energy that moves very slowly, and it dissipates in each of the organ systems, and it gets clogged up, right? And that's ultimately how imbalance or disease forms.
Right. That's interesting. And that's the most in-depth explanation that I've heard for an aura. And it really rings true to me so much, just because of my own spiritual experiences and connections that I've had, that it's all data, it's all information. And a lot of it you can't really put into words. So then it's hard to explain to people what you're talking about, or that you actually saw something.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it's been a very interesting unfolding. And so with the initial sweep or scan of somebody, like when I'm out and about, even today, this isn't something that for me, because I'm on the very, very high end of the spectrum when it comes to being energetically sensitive, it's not something I can turn off. But over time, I learned to pay attention or not pay attention. And that really helped me to have a semblance of control or personal power with it, as opposed to feeling completely bombarded and overwhelmed. Because when I'm out and about, it's like a general, different colors just coming over the crowd or over the top of whatever. And then if I'm looking at somebody, I can see the field and the different layers, but it's only when I'm working in session, or back when I was working as a paramedic, that I actually go into it. Right.
Interesting. So I have a question. Do you see the energy or auras of places, or just living beings?
Places in terms of physical locations, you mean?
Yeah, like a building or a store.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Everything has, because everything is energy, right? Everything is just energy. And so it has a vibrational matrix, if you will, that creates the physical matter. And so humans are super complex, because we're just trillions of vibrating particles and cells, all of which have different information, data, colors, whatever with it. But when you look at a tree, or if you look at any of the bushes or the flowers, to me, the way that I see that is always golden energy. And in the movie Matrix, they actually got it pretty right, because I see a lot of vertical data going up and down trees, stones, the earth, and buildings. Everything just resonates. They vibrate much more slowly, because they're not living, breathing beings.
The reason why I asked that question is because I don't see anything. I've never been able to see an aura or anything like that. but I'm very energy sensitive and I feel things and it affects me physically. So most of the time, if I go into a building or store, especially when I was a kid, I would feel physically ill.
Yep.
And it just drains and saps my energy dry. But if I'm in nature, I feel alive. Like I feel like I could literally take this energy into my body and do something with it. But I sometimes feel really weird or like, is something really wrong with me because nobody else seems to understand this, and people will tell me that it's all in my head. Do you like what you're hearing on this podcast? For just $10 a month, you can join Love Car Life Academy, where you'll have access to our exclusive community chat and our weekly live streams, where we answer your most pressing questions and deep dive into your spiritual practice. You don't have to be alone on this journey. Come join us. We would love to have you.
No, no, definitely not in your head, girl. And welcome to my struggle, because flashing back to South Dakota, little kid, toxic shame, internalization, in addition to my experience, it's not just one screen of data. I've got at least 15 screens running.
Oh, man.
And that's just normal for me. And there's so much stimulus that it takes me a tremendous amount of focus to be able to stay grounded in my body, right? But back when I'm a kid and I don't know what's going on, I'm just like being zapped with all this information. I also grew up in a very violent household. And so in addition to physical, navigating physical violence, I was also dealing with all of this sensitivity. And that led me down through my late teens, early 20s, into some pretty severe shadow. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I didn't have any safety or foundation or love or stability or somebody to be like, hey, you're okay. You're energetically sensitive. There's 1.6 billion of you minimum on the planet. You're here to help the collective shift in consciousness. You're like this for a reason. I didn't have that, right? And that began my process. For me, it was addiction, drugs, alcohol, smoking. I overdosed. I died. I had a near-death experience, which is one of the reasons I reached out to you, because I was like, oh yeah, she gets it, And then I began my healing process, in my shadow integration process, and my empowerment process with this. And that's what I do now, in addition to using it as a paramedic, which was totally amazing. I got so much to share there. But now I get it, girl. Our nervous systems are attuned. We chose pre-incarnation to come in like this, which a lot of us are like, dang it, why did I do this?
Right?
I want to take it back.
Want to be normal.
Right? Because most of what we hear is, what's wrong with you? Why are you so sensitive?
Yeah.
Why are you so emotional? Just get over it. And I'm like, it's literally like having your finger in a light socket and being charged all the time. It's a physical experience and an emotional experience, a mental experience. It's not just in our head. It's very, very visceral, right? Fast forward, now I understand that there is a method in the madness, if you will. There is, a reason, and the reason, however you view on ascension or what's happening collectively, we can all tell things are changing in this, day-to-day life. Things are shifting. The last number of years have really been a lot of shadow integration. People really come into terms with whatever they've been facing and having total breakdowns. And we got all kinds of things happening in that way. Well, I understand now that it's our time as energetically sensitive people to lean into our abilities, because we're actually holding just a higher frequency within ourselves. And that is continuously shifting and assisting the shift with other people waking up to their own nature as energy, as spirit, as, spirit having a human experience. So there's nothing wrong with you, girl.
Well, thank you so much
The answer for that is there's nothing wrong with you.
Thank you for validating that for me and for, I'm sure, so many watching, because a lot of the people drawn to a show like this are going to be energy sensitive.
Mhm.
So there's so many directions that we could go with this conversation. Would you be up for sharing about your near-death experience?
So mine was pretty much self-induced. I was coping through pretty heavy drugs and alcohol, like I said, and I had kind of hit bottom. And I overdosed and went into just a higher state of awareness. So to me, this was like being in awash in love. And I was everything and all at once. I understood everything at all at once. I felt complete peace and love and acceptance. And it was like the best because it was so nurturing and it was so counter to what I had experienced in this life. So I was like 19 and I was like, I'm good. Like I'll stay. And I actually heard a female voice say, "You're not done." And I was like, "Oh, yes, I am. Like, I'm good. I don't need to go back there. Screw that crap." But there was this awareness. And she's like, "We get it's hard. You chose a really hard path. But if you go back, you're going to help a lot of people understand this world," meaning the energetics world. And I just remember it being like I was, swimming in warm honey. Everything made sense, but it defied all logic and reason because everything was simultaneous. But it was just so like, oh, of course, right. Yeah, I remember. I remember. And when I obviously chose to come back, that was pretty jarring because I was in such a beautiful, expanded state of love and total understanding. I thought that everything would just be laid out for me. Like, okay, this is what you go do. But it wasn't that. I still had to like be human, handle my addictions, get myself cleaned up, turn my life around, challenge all my fears, challenge all the trauma, heal myself, integrate, and then become empowered, which is ultimately what I've done.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And especially the part about having to come back and do the work, because I think that's hard for a lot of people. We want to just have the path laid out and we want to be told exactly what to do. But part of being here is doing that work, of doing the shadow work. And that's part of what we came here for.
Totally. And the choice and the freedom, right? To like have the different experiences or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all
Right.
part of it.
So you were told that you chose a difficult life, and that part of your purpose in being here is to help people understand the energetic world that you are experiencing,
Mhm.
correct? So has that helped you somewhat in being able to deal with it and like all the over stimulus of it and everything?
Totally, especially now because I'm able to, like, the paramedic in me can just have a conversation and really make things make sense, right? Like, I'm not trying to be all like super spiritual or super whatever. It's just like, nah, man, this is just energy. There's nothing wrong with you. We can understand the mechanics of why we're wired this way, nervous system, endocrine system, hormones, right? We can understand that there's a spectrum of gifts. And we can talk more about that at length. But yes, having that awareness was like, okay, well, at least there's a reason for it, but still having to go back into my human experience, pull myself up by my bootstraps, become a paramedic, which is a very alpha, masculine, aggressive field, which I thrive in. But I was still very closeted because here I finally fit in with all these SWAT dudes and like, firefighters and stuff. So I didn't want to be the weird girl who sees dead people, right? Like I still
Right.
was kind of closeted. But over the years of running 911 calls, I became the paramedic who was just always there for death. And every experience that I had personally had around using drugs, alcohol, overdosing, like I would run those calls and have personal experience. And it just made sense. I was like, oh, right. Like I went through that. And now I can help people from a place of like really understanding. Because, you can feel it when somebody's like been there versus somebody who's just talking about it. And so the intensity and potency of where I came from started to make more sense. And as the calls just continued to happen and I would be there, it was like midwifing, right? Like somebody's just killed in a car wreck and their soul is outside their body and they're staring at their body in the car and they're completely confused. Like they were just going through Starbucks drive-through, man. They come out and get T-boned and that's it, and this happens every day all over the world. And I would see them energetically, clairvoyantly, and telepathically be able to communicate. Like I developed a kind of a protocol of like relaying to them what was happening. You're dead. We're going to pull you out of the car. We're going to do CPR in your body, blah, 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 blah. And the whole time I could see the soul as we were working on the body, right? Or the medical deaths, all the different types. But ultimately, it totally began to make sense. And once I became more comfortable with, okay, this is obviously helping. Like how could this be bad? Like I was told, like, this is just, I'm being there in literally people's worst nightmares, worst moments, day after day after day, hundreds upon thousands of calls and people. And I was kept seeing that it was positive. It was helpful. And that really changed my tune around any sense of shame. And that's when I just started to like adopt this thing. And anybody who's listening, if you're out there and you've been told you're too much or you're too sensitive or you're too whatever, for me, I just got to the point where I was like, this is normal for me. You don't have to understand it, right? But this is how I am. And so what am I going to do about it? How am I going to take care of my system? How do I learn to navigate this much stimulus? How do I learn, right, to feel good and healthy and empowered and thrive, even though I'm picking up like 25 times the amount of detail and information of the standard person? And that was the pivot point, girl, because that changed everything. Instead of me wanting validation outside from other people who just couldn't get it, I finally was like, all right, it is what it is. Like, this is who I am. This is how I am. And let me lean into it. And yeah, that just blew the doors open in a good way.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate what you said about learning to accept yourself and give yourself what you need. I think that's something that a lot of people can benefit from. And I'm also really fascinated by your journey working with these 911 calls and being able to assist with spirits who had left their bodies. Could you share a little bit more about what you did to help those spirits or what you do?
Oh, it's amazing. It's like a symphony. Okay, so you have to understand, we as first responders we're wired a certain way, right? We run towards what everybody else is running away from. So we naturally have a predisposition to go into chaos and to kind of thrive and bring order. So my system is wired for that. But we would come onto a call anytime. For me, I was going on a death call, which was almost daily. For me, my towel was tasting metal for whatever reason. And as soon as we would arrive on scene and my boots would hit the ground, everything would expand like the Matrix and slow down. And it would crystallize, and I could see every single detail of the call happening simultaneously. And it was silent, but I would see whether it's, if you imagine like, bodies exploding or like brain mat, whatever, it's a very intense world out there. Whatever the scene was would be very volatile, but I could see the energetics of it flowing over the top, people screaming, people like melting down, whatever. And I would go straight into my patient. And let's say we have somebody who's deceased and we need to do CPR, or even better, somebody who is about to cross. So they're still alive. And they would be looking at me and start to talk to me. Well, I would notice that their auric field would begin to expand. And the chakra systems, it looks like a ribbon. is so cool. It's this perfect, and it's organized, and it's extremely complex, but perfectly simple. And it happens just like that, where it starts at the root, typically, not always, but usually, and it'll unfurl like a ribbon going up the chakras. And that's the person's consciousness releasing from the system. And then the light at the end of the tunnel is their consciousness beginning to ascend out the crown chakra. Right. And so I would watch this happen, and I would watch the soul exit the crown. And usually they would have deceased loved ones or pets, or if they had, religious beliefs like archetypes, would be waiting in like up near the ceiling in the corner of the room. And so they would kind of shoot out the top of their head. And some people who didn't know they were going to die, it was a little less expected, but not fully traumatic. Maybe it was a heart attack where they lingered for a day or two or whatever. They would kind of come out, and there would be more potency, more color, more, but a lot of people they're already dead in their bodies, and they're just existing for decades. And they come out just like this little poof. It's very interesting. But regardless, watching them come out of their body and shed form, it's just like taking off a heavy coat. There's nothing to fear, right? And then they go into that expanded state, and they're looking around, and all of a sudden they feel good because they're like, they got out of that body. And all of a sudden their loved ones are there, and their pets are there. And then they begin their process in that way. So I saw that over and over and over for 15 years. It was really beautiful to witness.
Wow, that's incredible. Did your coworkers know that you were working in the spiritual realm?
Initially, no, I was super, because I didn't really understand what I was doing for the first long time, first couple of years. But then everybody wanted to work with me because I got all the crazy calls, right? Because I was like that magnet. And then they couldn't see it, but they could feel it. And it would be like a warmth, or it would just feel kind of like expanded and calmer. And so they could pick up on that, but they didn't know how to articulate it. By the time I did the 15 years consecutively of the 911, and this was all like inner city California 911, super busy. I was pretty locked and loaded, pretty dialed in with like, all right, this is what it is for me. And then I had already begun to become empowered and understand what each of my abilities are, and then how to like help not only myself with it, but other people. Yeah.
Did you ever see anybody who like had a near-death experience and ended up coming back into the body?
Yeah. Near-death experiences, whether it be traumatic, we'd oftentimes have a lot of trauma calls. And the way that those are different than a medical, where the auric field expands and the chakras unfurl. The trauma call, like you're in your body and then boop, you're just not. You're knocked out of the body, but there's still, as long as there's a heartbeat with some form of respiration, there will be a tether. And so usually the soul would just kind of like sit next to me when I was like in the back of the ambulance taking their body to the trauma center or whatever. And we would be having like a telepathic conversation while I'm doing CPR, while I'm pushing meds, while I'm starting IVs, all these things. But yeah, ultimately I was able to not only do the work needed for CPR wise, but they would essentially, it's like going down a slide and kind of like going back into the body is what I saw. A couple of my hardest experiences that stuck with me were ones that they were really traumatized that they had just died. They didn't want to at all. And they were grasping at their body, and they couldn't figure out why they couldn't get back in. That was really, really hard to witness. But fortunately, that was only a couple.
Oh, wow. That would be so difficult. I mean, even just listening to the work that you're doing, it sounds like it would be really mentally challenging to be in these crisis situations every day.
Yeah. And you got to remember we're wired for it.
Yeah.
First responders, it's a calling. Plus, I understand the violence of my upbringing and the complete chaos of my upbringing primed me perfectly for it. And not understanding my abilities was kind of like a blank canvas for me. So I spent all of these calls and, countless experiences just kind of like figuring it out as I went. really. And I mean, I thrived in that place. And to me, it is such an honor to be with someone as they're transitioning. Like you think of their whole life, right? Or even if they have a near-death experience and then they come back down into the body. It's such an honor to witness that because they've gone their whole life and like you're right there to, assist and facilitate. Just an honor.
Wow. So I've spoken to some mediums who say that there's a certain percentage of souls that don't actually have someone come for them, and they are confused and not understanding why they've died, and they end up getting trapped in the earth or the astral realm or whatever. Has that been your experience?
There's definitely stragglers, but ultimately there's no fragment of God that's left behind ever. So ultimately everything and everyone can integrate. Sometimes people are really attached to their life or a place or a thing or a something. So even if they shed the body, they're like, no, I'm not going. Or like I responded to that Paradise fire that just like incinerated the entire town of California, right? It was like 5 years ago or something. There's a big movie coming out next year about it. And it came so fast and so abruptly. And there was all these souls when we went in just floating, right? In like the burnt homes or the burnt cars or whatever. And so you can have like in that moment, they were all confused. But ultimately, if you have a conversation like, hey, you're dead, this is what just happened. A fire went through and your body's destroyed, right? And you have the choice now to cross. 9 times out of 10, they'll cross. And that's just going into the higher state of consciousness, crossing over is what that means, right? But some of them are like, nope, not yet.
I've heard you speak about how angels come and help at these scenes. What are the angels and what roles do they play?
Everything is consciousness. So angels and celestials are just different frequencies and vibrations of consciousness, right? Just like everything is different realms and levels of vibration of consciousness. And with angels in particular, it's just the most exquisite. They would look like light beings, androgynous, glorious, beautiful. I didn't really see wings as much. It was just like this omnipresent love, calm, just this really calm sensation that would come in and just blanket everything with this silence. And that was my experience with angels. They're usually really tall, like upwards 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, depending on. I would usually see them on trauma calls, gunshot wounds, school shootings, fires, earthquakes, big sudden things, drive-bys, all the things. And they would come and just hold this frequency. And so the soul who had just, shed their body, who was freaking out, would essentially start to like connect with the angelic presence. And it just felt like a homecoming, like a warm hug. And then I would watch them be enveloped in that warm hug and then disappear from view. Incredible.
Wow, I was going to say, it sounds incredible. You mentioned that people are usually met by their family members, their pets, or sometimes religious archetypes. Do you feel that the religious archetypes like the Buddha or Jesus or whoever it may be are real beings that exist? Or is it just consciousness taking that form because it's comfortable for the person?
Both. It's predominantly consciousness is my understanding. And then we as humans in our mind and the egoic construct, we like to make things fit into a box, right? And so we see this a lot all across, whether it's religion or spirituality. There's kind of like, okay, this is what it is. And this is the way, or this is how it goes. And I think just that's part of the human design, like we want to feel safe. We want to feel like we've got control. And so we try to take what is absolutely infinite, because you've experienced it's so big. It is infinite. And we can't just bring it down into a box. So I think that people conceptualize a lot of different types of teachings, and then they can identify with those. And people can get a lot of, great takeaways from some of that. They can also have a lot of trauma to overcome as a result of that. It just depends, you know?
Right, exactly. So is there maybe one or two experiences that you've had helping people cross over that stand out to you that you'd like to share with us?
The one that changed everything for me because I was still resistant to acknowledging my gifts was a 3-week-old SIDS baby. And I'll never forget as long as I live, the firefighter comes running out, and this kid is like the size of a Cabbage Patch doll, right? His eyes are this big around. He's literally running and just like chucks me this dead kid. And I don't care who you are. If you're holding a dead baby, everything freezes. And I was in like this place of like, my mind was like, what? And spirit essentially came and kind of knocked me, Sarah, out of the way. I remember I was watching from the top of the ambulance while my system was expanded, and we ran the CPR to get this baby to the hospital. The entire time, the baby had these really beautiful, it almost looked like, you know, those white dandelions when you blow and you see the little umbrella things like that, but they were like alive and they were pink and gold, like the silvery pink, yummy. I didn't understand. I was just trying to like, you know, get the kid to the hospital. But we got to the hospital, baby made it. But that for me was the call that changed everything because I had never been knocked out of the way before. I was used to kind of expanding, kind of like feeling, but because I had vapor locked, I got knocked out of the way. And that was the call that was my personal tipping point because I was like, all right, obviously, like, number one, this is helpful and beneficial, but I want to feel safe. I want to feel comfortable in what this is and understanding how it works through my body, why I can see these things, why I know what's going to happen before it does. And that's really when I decided to start getting educated. For me, it began with just basic yoga and meditation. And then I went into medical intuition, mediumship, shamanism, plant medicine work. I've been doing this for a long, long, long time now, but I wanted to make it make sense to my brain. And I wanted to feel empowered as opposed to as this is something that's being done to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That was going to be my next question, is to ask, for people who do have gifts like this, how can they work with them to ground themselves into their body and be able to use the gifts in a way that's, you know, so that they're not just completely overwhelmed by it.
First is acceptance. Like this for a reason. You're not a weirdo. Upwards of 20% of the world's population is energetically sensitive, and even more are coming online and coming into the world right now because of collectively where we are. Over 1.6 billion. So we're not weird. There's a lot of us. Okay. Also understand the spectrum. The biggest end of the spectrum is going to be empaths. So the largest makeup of the spectrum is the people who feel and then take on.
Mm-hmm.
So things that will help those people are understanding nervous system regulation, okay, hydration, and then understanding how to regulate your own field so you don't feel like you have to protect yourself. Okay, that takes time to learn. This is what I work with people on now all the time, is like helping them understand their gifts. And we can get more specific if you want, but we've got empath, and then we've got the precogs and the claircogs, like where they just know stuff, right? And it's like we all do. You know who's going to call you. You know what song is coming on, right? That kind of thing. Then we've got clairvoyance, which is my strength. Then we've got clairaudience, which is hearing, which in today's culture, who wants to hear that, or who wants to say that they hear voices, right?
Right.
They don't want to be locked up. They don't want to be shot up with Haldol, right? And so, but it's part of our giftedness. And then we've got mediums and channels, right? Where we're seeing entities or we're seeing deceased human spirits. So there's an actual spectrum. And when we understand, sometimes somebody's like empathic, and that's their primary ability. Amazing. And then you've got people like me that are like all of them. And so it's not better. None are better than the other. It's just like, okay, you've got these channels. So figure out what your channels are. For you, you said you feel.
Yes.
No, right? I can
sometimes, yes.
Yeah. And in that you learn about each of your gift and ability in order of how it presents to you. Okay. But the most important thing is 1, acceptance, 2, understanding there's nothing wrong, 3, becoming empowered, which learning to ground. There's a million tools for that. Physically going outside, obviously breathing, hydration, Epsom salt baths, grounding mats, all different kinds of crystals, all different kinds of practices. Movement is very important for us. So connecting breath to movement through yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. For me, I'm very intense. So I like a lot of really intense exercise helps me ground, and it helps me process this much stimulus because it gives me dopamine, serotonin, it balances my nervous system, and it regulates my hormones, all of which are highly affected when we're sensitive.
That's so helpful.
Girl, I could go for days. I got all kinds of protocols. Yeah,
I'm sure you do.
What I do now full time, so it's fun.
So let's hear a little bit more about what you do. You have a full-time private healing practice.
Yes. And so people that reach out to me, they're usually energetically sensitive. So here's the 2 primary archetypes I see. Heavy, lethargic, despondent, apathetic, depressed, sluggish belly, GI, carrying weight usually around the middle. And no matter what they do, they just can't get going. Okay. So both of these are what I like to call undiagnosed sensitives because they don't even know that their systems are sensitive. And that's why they're having this presentation. So I see that archetype all the time. I also see, the wired people who can never, ever stop and they're super busy and they have anxiety and insomnia and they can't let down and they're just all the time. That's going to be the other archetype. These are classic indicators that you're energetically sensitive. And the other one is that I see people who have gone to every doctor and they don't get any result. They don't get any answers because they've tried all the pills and all the things, and it's just more of the same. So they're like, all right, I don't know. What is this? So my strength is medical intuition and psychic surgery. And I can get super technical, but essentially it's like pressure washing and roto-rooting people for a living and helping them understand oh, this is what you feel and this is why, and this is where it comes from. And here's your trauma. And this is what you're doing to cope. And you're okay. But it's totally resetting the entire system and then giving them a protocol to move forward with so they feel empowered.
Wow, I love that so much. And I like how you broke down the different groups of people and different symptoms that they may be having.
Yeah, because you know what, girl? There's the spiritual world. There's people out there that are open to this and they already know that they're like this. But there's way more that aren't even aware, or maybe they know, but they're too scared or they're closeted. So that's what I'm up to now, is bridging the mainstream with the energetic and holistic in a really practical way. And we're just forming Empath X, and Empath X is the new paradigm of human. So essentially a real life school for the gifted. And so it's take away all the fear. We're not weirdos over here in the corner. We can come out of being fringe and scared, and we can we're actually badass. When we understand how to use this and feel really good, life is next level, man. And that's what we're doing now.
That sounds exciting. So where can people learn more about your healing practice and the school that you're starting?
So sarahkgrace.com is where you can find session information. And I've got a really sweet online community full of energetically sensitive people called The Grace Place. And I gave you a link to give to your viewers for free month. You guys are welcome to come check it out. But you can find all the information at sarahkgrace.com, and that's Sarah with an H. So sarahkgrace.com. Empath X is being built right now. And my first book, Journey into Grace, is in contract to become a scripted television series. And
wow,
it's just time, girl. It's time. It's our time.
Lots of exciting things. Yeah, sorry. Lots of exciting things going on. I'm excited for you. And I will put that link for the free month in the show notes along with your other links. Before we go, Is there any final message that you would like to share with the viewers?
Yeah, just don't give up. Like if you're called, if you're overwhelmed, no matter how dark, no matter how far gone you think you are, no matter how isolated and alone it may seem, ultimately you can continue the integration and the healing to reconnect with that consciousness that is your true nature. And as you reconnect to that conscious awareness, your own gifts, your own abilities will begin to come forth. And then spirit will show you what's next. I didn't know how all of these things would fit together and why I came from such a severe and extreme, dark, traumatic environment, but it all makes sense now. So ultimately, wherever you are is just now. It can and it will shift if you just are willing to stay heart open.
Thank you so much. And Sarah, thank you so much for being willing to share from your experiences. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having me. And thank you so much for what you're doing, girl. You're really a big beacon, a big light, and you're putting a tremendous amount of awareness out there into the world. So thank you. Thank you for leaning into your giftedness.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for what you're doing because it's so important. And even just talking to you in this interview today has made me feel so much better about myself. And so I know it's going to have a huge positive impact on people. And the work that you're doing is going to make and is making such a big difference.
Absolutely. Really quickly, last little thing, when you said you went into a building and got drained, just understand the more you become aware of your own energetics and boundaries, instead of needing to protect, what we do is we become grounded and we fill the auric field with our own essence, and it just ricochets any energy off that doesn't serve you. So you won't get drained or overwhelmed anymore. So little trick of the trade there for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.